Sounds good. Got it. Okay. So, hi everybody, and a very good afternoon to one and all. Welcome to the CFPR seminar series. It's a busy time of the semester, as you know, but despite that, you are here. So, thank you very much for your presence. Now, we have a very interesting topic at hand today, and I'm very happy to welcome our two speakers. Dr. Gu Xiaorong from the University of Suffolk, as well as Dr. Professor Doris Buller Hegelberger. Did I pronounce right?
Oh
From
my
the
God, you
University,
did.
yeah, from the University of Wuppertal. I know there's
Perfect.
a time difference. Yeah, it's 9 in the morning for Xiaorong and 10 for Prof. Doris. So thank you for taking the time, yeah, for calling in and sharing your research with us. Now, let me say a few words about the speakers before we start. Very briefly, Dr. Gu is a lecturer of childhood studies who does work on children's migration and mobilities, as well as intergenerational relationships and their positioning vis-a-vis family, school, and the nation state. Last year in 2023, she co-edited the Emerald Handbook of Childhood and Youth in Asian Societies and was also featured as Sociologist of the Month with Current Sociology in April of 2023. So congratulations for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
But now over to Prof. Doris. She's the Rudolph Carnap Senior Professor at the University of Wuppertal, past president of RC53, Sociology of Childhood, ISA. A recent publication of hers includes Victim, Perpetrator, or What Else? Generational and Gender Perspectives on Children, Youth, and Violence, published in Sociological Studies of Children and Youth in 2020. And I think this was edited together with Lars Albert. So as you will hear, the speakers have a very ambitious book project that is in the works, seeking to put together a team of 20 very established scholars and looking at the sociology of childhood within the Asian scene itself. So I will let the speakers enlighten us as to what they plan to do with the book. But I think the plan is for the speakers to speak for 35 minutes, and then we have a Q&A after that. So if it sounds good, I will invite Xiaorong, you want to start us off?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Chua, for your kind introduction. And hello to everyone. Like I see people, do I admit them on the screen?
No, Nolina will do it, so you can
All right,
just proceed with your
sure.
presentation. Yeah.
Yeah. Hello, everyone in CFPR. I mean, it's really nice to be back. I always regarded CFPR seminar series as my classroom. So it's really nice to be back in the classroom. And good morning and good afternoon to you all. Today we're going to, as Vincent just said, introduce our book project together with my co-editor, Doris here. And we'll first introduce the intellectual background of this book project. Each of us actually edited a special issue with current sociology in this area. And that laid the foundation for the book project, which will be described in the second part, and which will be followed by an introduction of three key concepts: generation, existential, inequality, and children's voice. We conclude by a very tentative, ambitious ideal of, making the case for a sociology of childhood in Asia.
Well, hello from my side too to everybody, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to speak here. I want to start with some introduction into this theoretical paradigm which we use in our book. What is it? This new childhood studies paradigm or sociology of childhood paradigm, which is something which how it is sometimes called. There are different names. This approach to childhood is not that old. That's why it's called new. It took shape in the 1990s, and it made a sort of contrast to the earlier approaches, the approaches of socialization or developmental psychology. It is not concerned with the steps, with the pace, and with the quality of human development, but it is concerned with the position of children in society. It is concerned with their rights and duties, with the spaces and institutions that are provided for children, with the discourses on children, and, very important as well, with children's own contribution to social interactions and contexts. A catchword might be children are studied not as becomings, but as beings, as always already members of a society, and not just in preparation for the society. Within this approach, there have been, in the last 4 decades since it exists, there have been a lot of new accentuations, so-called paradigm shifts. They are often announced, such shifts, as there are also different disciplines contributed. Well, in the beginning, it was rather a sociological enterprise. Now there are also educational sciences involved. There are children's geographies involved. And so there are some new ideas coming in. But we find two main concepts which I might explain now, which we find in certain variations, but which we find implicitly or explicitly in this research. The first idea is the idea of children as actors, of the agency of children. This idea of agency can be used in a more naive way, when agency is considered as something naturally given, as something ontologically given. And it can be as well considered in more sociological way, where children have agency, yes, but in the frame of social interactions or in the frame of social practices, of social relations, and their agency is considered to be enabled and restricted by these interactions or by these practices. And secondly, it is the idea that age categories, the categories of being a child or being an adult, that these categories are not just naturally and invariably given, but are as well socially constituted, that they are as well socially disputed and socially enforced. This idea in the beginning was relying very much on historical research on childhood in Western societies. And this research showed that there were interests of social order, interests of religion, interests of social class behind the definition and institutionalization of age categories. The institutionalization in law or in medicine or in education, in educational institutions. This idea of childhood, as it is now predominant or hegemonial, was then not only an idea of the Western middle class, which was rich enough to realize it, but it was also a political project. It was installed with quite some pressure against lower class, some pressure against outsiders, pressure also, as well as we know, against indigenous people, like we find it in Australia on children, or also in Western countries. In this context of socially constituted age categories, we find as well the expression of generational order. This is quite prominent, of an order analogous to gender order, of an order between the generations, the age groups, which is structuring societies like the order of gender is structuring societies. This is the approach. However, this kind of research has mainly been done in Western societies. When I tried to review the state of the art of the 2 decades in 2010, I found only a few contributions dealing with other societies, with non-Western countries. I edited them in a special issue of Childhood in 2008, but there were not really research contexts in non-Western countries, research contexts for this kind of childhood research. For instance, there were no sections or groups in professional associations. There were no specific journals, no conferences on this specific kind of childhood research. So my overview I made in 2010 in a volume of Current Sociology was focused on Western societies, was limited to Western societies. And in this way, it gave, I collected and edited an overview on 10 countries. And in this way, it was mirroring what is valid nowadays as childhood in these countries. We see the imperative of an individualized, cultivated childhood, a childhood in which children have to become, that is the imperative, the child has to become himself, herself, by cultivating their talents, what should happen, however, playfully. This is what we see in these contributions I collected. Children's agency, mainly, of course, there is some sort like agency also in this rather passive protected childhoods. Agency is always given, patterns do not enact themselves, rules have to be enacted, but with the agency of children that we see, it is mainly agency like develop one's talents, like showing, signaling what are my desires, my talents, like coordination of leisure time activities, like the children are active in peer relations, working out the peer relations, but this agency of the children mostly remains in the boundaries of this pattern of a child that is receiving the child as a target of adult efforts, which it accepts or rejects. And something very important, these adult efforts that we see in these societies and in this research on the societies, it requires a lot of financial, cultural, and social capital. For children's agency, for this agency, they show in this rather receiving childhood concept, we can also say it's a sort of competent compliance. They fit into this expectation.
Yeah. So 10 years later, more than 10 years later, so when I worked on the Value of Children project at RA, I was really pushed into thinking hard about, what the Global South can contribute, in this line of research. So that was kind of engagement with this body of literature, where I, asked key questions in relation to the global North normative paradigm. So the questions are, the majority of children in the Global South grapple with persistent socioeconomic stresses, geopolitical disturbances, public welfare shortages, and cultural legacies rooted in hierarchical human relationships. What kind of paradigms, what kind of frameworks, and what kind of tools can we use to analyze and unpack the nature and social meanings of childhood in these global Southern societies? And what are the ontological, political, and epistemological limits of the Western-centric paradigm, the so-called new social studies of childhood in the literature? So that was, the basis of a critique of the new paradigm. First of all, despite the claim to study, the social character of the childhood, meaning the childhood in its social context, the overall research paradigm seems to homogenize and hegemonize childhood, as mentioned earlier, in this very global North middle class, social realities. That is not always the case for many children in global South. And secondly, the focus in this paradigm on the humanist and agentic model of the centered child, as Spiro would characterize it, is often associated with certain methodological preferences. In particular, recent years, that is, ideal of child participatory research, meaning the child is not only studied as the subject, but also the co-researcher in the research paradigm. Well, it has been very, very prosperous, but over time we see more repetitive works, and that, from my perspective, is a methodological limitation. And thirdly, despite given the kind of narrow ideas in terms of the child, the conceptualization of the childhood, and also the methodological preferences, this body of literature increasingly is seen disengaged from mainstream sociological theories and projects. So in the 2022 special issue with current sociology, I assembled 8 research studies. I need to go back to this issue here, from mainly Asian societies, and including one African case, to really use the ideal of value, the so-called valuation approach, to understand how children in different societies are valued by different stakeholders rooted in the social, economic, and cultural conditions. For the sake of time, I won't, delve into details. If you are interested, please check that special issue there. And so these two special issues, and also by a very lucky incidents, I got involved with this project with Doris, and she kindly invited me to join and co-edit the very special issue, the handbook that we are going to talk about today, together with 2 other colleagues, Jessica and Yelena. So we are happy to report that the handbook was published last year, and there's a QR code. If you're interested, just scan it, and it's open access, and we welcome your review and comments. So briefly, this volume of childhood and youth in Asian societies covers Asia in its very broad and encompassing ways. And it covers 4 Asian regions, including East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Central Asia. In this map, you can see here, one flag represents one case here. We see a very widespread coverage. besides the Asian countries, we also included cases dealing with diaspora Asians and transnational Asian communities in Europe and US. And together, we have 20 scholars at different career stages affiliated in institutions across the world. And our disciplinary backgrounds actually are quite diverse as well, including scholars, trained in sociology, anthropology, region studies, gender, sexuality studies, education, migration, and so on and so forth. We'll next introduce the 3 key concepts behind the handbook.
Yeah, this is the first of our concepts, is the concept of intergenerational order. What do we mean by that? I had presented this concept of generational order, this juxtaposition of adults and children, which is typical for the Western societies, and we realized that in our contributions on Asian societies, there was another concept taking contour, or a different version of this concept taking contour. The age relations are not so much about a juxtaposition of children and adults, of children in the age of childhood, but it's rather a lifelong way of organizing societies along age obligations. One is the younger in some context and the elder in other contexts, and there is a differentiated web, a fine web of obligations and of rights in these societies, and childhood have to be understood before the background of this age relations, of these by age defined obligations and possibilities that the society provides. We also call it a fabric, a social fabric of age groups with mutual obligations. And this is valid in public life as well as in family life. And intergenerational relations also they provide a different role for children than which goes beyond this normative childhood we find in Western societies. A second concept we called existential inequality. What do we mean by that? Inequality is an important concept of Western childhood research, and we find it, for instance, in all the studies of OECD, of PISA studies. They suggest when they talk about inequality, they talk about a sort of competitive inequality. There is this sort of competition in this concept. There's a sort of competition conceived of in this concept, suggesting a linear decline in access to society's resources, to society's position, depending on members' social position. All the same, this model implicates that everybody has the same entitlement, and that welfare state regulation should principally ensure this, that all people have access to the same dimensions, but it also it conceives of differences in realizing these entitlements. But there is, of course, something that welfare states should provide, and mostly do provide, but in a different extent, like education for everybody, healthcare for everybody, mobility rights for everybody. The studies of the handbook showed that there are unequal entitlements as well. in terms of access to basic resources for different groups of members in several countries that we had, inequalities that may exclude participation in certain areas, inequalities that may even endanger survival. And this is why we do not talk about this competitive inequality like we have it in a model of socioeconomic gradient, but we talk about existential inequality.
The third concept we want to emphasize is the ideal of voice. So since the very beginning of childhood sociology, the ideal of voice is very important, and scholars repeatedly call for giving voice to children. But we want to critique this conceptualization on two bases. First of all, there's a decorative use, as we put it, of voice, meaning to just quote voice for quote children for representation. The second thing is that the voice conceptualized in this framework is a binary concept. Either children are voiceful or voiceless. So in this study, we argue for a more complex and nuanced understanding of voice. First of all, to contextualize voice in children's social, political, and normative environment that would shape the discursive and substantive agencies of them. And secondly, to go beyond the binary of voice, to really look at voice as a spectrum. So childhood sociologists should be empirically and analytically attentive not only what is said, what is voice, but also what is not spoken about and what is tangentially spoken about. We're going to give examples later. Next, we're going to report key findings captured in the three key words, catchwords that we're going to present. Yeah.
Yeah, these catchwords we had them in the title, and I talk about to highlight some findings. I will illustrate the catchword blessing. In some of the studies, we clearly find that the children are considered to be a blessing, to be a hope for a better future, but as well to be a possibility to continue the highly valued traditions. And we find this, for instance, in the Indian study, where the study on how childhood is conceived in rural and urban India by Ravneet Kaur. But I will illustrate it now by the example of the Central Asian study, the Nebere Alu practice, also sort of intergenerational solidarity showing up in this, that this is a practice where grandmothers occasionally make a grandson, usually the son of their firstborn, their child, their special child. They make it their here and the future pillar of the family. They take it as a mother. The grandmother takes this child as a mother and bridges in this way also a longer generational gap than she could only with her own children. And it is this child, there are very big hopes for this child. The grandmother really hopes that this will accompany her until she dies, and that this child will also ensure that the traditions will be strong. And this practice may be seen to be very age hierarchic, because the young mothers not always are so happy about giving their child to their grandmother. But sometimes it's also a real support in an area where there's a lot of poverty and where it's hard for the young families to make their living. Needless to say that this hope of the grandmother does not always materialize due to different wishes of the child once it's grown up, or simply due to economic necessity, the child will then all the same sometimes leave the family, the grandmother, and live elsewhere, migrate abroad, or go to the cities where it's easier to make a living in. Nevertheless, these high expectations of children, this trust in them as the future, are also helpful because they make a special investment of care and financial resources possible in a situation of the regions where these are really a necessity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the second catchphrase that we use is the young generation as bridge. This is in particularly prominent in the cases of migration. That is, quite frequent phenomenon in Asian societies, transnationally, society. We have several very interesting cases in this handbook that dealt with this intergenerational negotiation in the context of migration in different ways. We have the first case here, Siqi Tu, who studied the China's parachute generation, meaning the children in upper middle class from cosmopolitan China to the US for high school. And these children are the migrants and their parents are left behind. So how they negotiate their relationships across the ocean. And that's a very interesting study. And she finds that the children, in a way, helps their parents to, adjust to the cultural differences in some cases, but not always successful. And we have other cases like return migration and transnational elite making by Artberry, which is a very interesting case about Indian, transnational migration families dealing with how to raise children in the transnational context. And I want to emphasize give an example in the last case, the second generation Viet German, children in Germany, and they also kind of in this context, given the parents, new needs to adjust to the new society and children's, cultural proficiency, especially linguistic proficiency, and they often serve as the broker, for the family to deal with the local societies. And that is one case. A young woman described her intergenerational relations with her parents. And in particular, there was an incident where the family business got an accident and they need to negotiate with the local council. And this lady, because she has the linguistic proficiency, was able to be the broker. And that for her changed the dynamic with her parents. And from then on, her parents become more, given her more autonomy to making her decisions. And the title of the essay, of the chapter, actually goes, in this way, my parents could develop. And the last catchword that we use is the young generation as burden bearer for family survival and future success. This is particularly in the cases of poor and lower class families in many Asian societies, where children participate in the family, not only actively participate in the family survival and livelihood strategies, and are part of the very important aspect of families' future success plans, in particular through education. And in my own study of China's children from rural urban migrant families, for example, I found that many children also do what we call the emotion labor in order to sustain the relationship between their parents and themselves. of course, we have a very richer, assemblage of richer studies in this handbook. Some of our authors have also explored the potentialities of the young generation in rebelling against and reconfiguring and reimagining the existing intergenerational orders. And this case by Bolota on the Thai youth as a political force for democracy vis-a-vis the royal kingship and the political force. And also we have J. de los Reyes described the left behind children who actually reject the what he called the mobility imperative and reimagine familyhood and family practices. And Doris?
Very short only. We have also cases where the children or the young people try to reimagine, reconfigure existing generational orders, but they are not very successful. For instance, one of these cases we found in Turkey, where the girls wanted to have larger spaces of actions, larger spaces of decisions, and larger spaces where they can move physically. But they were not successful. We also have these cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to summarize, this handbook is a systematic study of Asia in its very comprehensive and dynamic forms. And it reveals and diverges the diverse and heterogeneous childhoods in Asian societies in terms of the inter-region diversity. So this handbook has 4 subsections dealing with the 4 Asian regions, and in each region we have a section introduction. As you'll see from these introductions, we have between these regions very different kind of normative ideas and practices of doing childhood. And within each society, our contributions are able to reveal social class inequalities and rural-urban divides and gender gaps. In terms of methodology, our authors are really demonstrating methodological pluralism. We used focus groups, interviews, ethnography, critical discourse analysis, and so on and so forth. And that contributes to the very rich and dynamic nature of the studies. And this book opens up new methodological and epistemological grounds in childhood and youth studies. In particular, we emphasized the 3 key concepts earlier. And it provides a basis and encouragement of future childhood and youth studies in Asian countries. And last, we want to build on this and make a case for a sociology of childhood in Asia from a sociology of knowledge perspective. Reviewing the kind of state of art in the scholarship in this region. Of course, we acknowledge that we shouldn't overgeneralize, and there are exceptional cases. For example, in India, we've seen a very vibrant childhood sociology scene, and scholars have produced many very interesting and rich studies. But in general, in much of the region, we see still childhood and children are studied in terms of child-centric and methodologically homogeneous and positivist paradigms. I'm going to use China as a case here because I know China a bit more, and I've written quite I've written about this case in the East Asian introduction chapter. So in the case of China, childhood and children studies are either subsumed under the developmental psychology department, or in the sociological department, it's often under the paradigm of social stratification studies. So in either way, children are regarded as, the very passive recipients of adult influences, and whereas their own experiences, perspectives, and subjectivities remain unseen or unheard. So if you look at the publication, landscape in China, the top sociology journal, 社会学研究, for example, you rarely see a study on children or childhood. And also, even if when children are touched upon, it's again as a statistic. So in this way, we hope that the child sociology of the childhood perspective could help and change the situation to unleash more rigorous, rich, and diverse analytical perspectives that bring children's own views, ideas, experiences into the picture. Thank you very much. That's our presentation.
Thank you very much, Xiaorong and Doris. Very interesting. I do have questions, but I want to give the floor a chance to ask. Anybody, any takers? Okay, maybe I can sort of start the ball rolling. I'm very interested and was very taken by the distinction that you drew between becoming and being. I tend to agree that, in some societies, childhood is seen as the precursor to adulthood, and in that certain sense, children are rendered to be invisible, and therefore becoming, visible adults then subsequently. I'm going to be very simplistic here, okay, because I've heard the presentation, and there were two phrases that keep coming up when you talk about the Asian data. And the first phrase is a hopeful future. You're always framing this in terms of a hopeful future. And the other phrase is future success. So we're always framing children in terms of what they can become and what they can do in the future, as opposed to seeing children in the here and now. All right. So my very simplistic observation is this, and I wonder to what extent do you agree that Asian societies are more likely to view children as becoming under the auspices of duties and responsibilities and so on, burden bearers, whilst Western societies are more likely than Asian societies to view children as being, because of a discourse of rights as opposed to a discourse of duties. I know I'm being very simplistic because you say we shouldn't overgeneralize and so on, but I cannot help but notice that the way childhood is framed, is different in Asia as opposed to perhaps a more Western societies. Please correct me. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But it's interesting to me that the movement from becoming to being occurs at different rates in different societies. And what are the factors that accelerate this? And what are the factors that slow this down? It is basically my question.
Doris, you want to?
I would also not so. I mean, it's very catchy to introduce this approach to use that that juxtaposition of being and becoming. But of course, the children are beings as becomings. When they are members of the society, they are always members of the society that are perceived to be becomings, and they perceive themselves to be becomings. So, but they are, as such becomings, they are already beings. You know what I mean? And I think we as sociologists, as a sociologist, I lose, if not considering these beings as becomings, I sort of throw away or close a possible access door to analyze society, because to analyze societies in this way, you talked about the slowing down or the speeding up of this process of being and becoming. Already that we conceive of children now in a different way, that is an insight into societies. It is an insight into markets who profit from this. There's a large market segment profiting from giving the children this illusion to participate. And there is also sort of adults who make it possible for their children to participate in their markets. They enhance their position themselves. This is, for instance, very important in Germany, where I live, to have the child participating in these occasions, and to make this visible to the neighbor and to the relatives. And it's a sort of status dimension, how excellent your parenting became. And that's why I think it was very catchy to use these words, but in a way, we as sociologists should be aware that children are beings as becomings, because a childhood without. I wonder how this is in societies with a really high child mortality rate, where the child is not forcibly a future. This would be an interesting research question, because also I think these societies conceive their own futures differently. If the possible futures of the children are not that sure, are really questionable. I did not answer your question fully. Maybe Sairong, you may add.
I'll try to think about this. I think the question about becoming is really about the temporalities of childhood. But I mean, from the very existential way, each of us, it's at the simultaneously a being and a becoming, right? We all occupy these two, or even three. We have the past as well, the history and the present and the future. So I would say, and we should be actually analytical about both the being dimension and the becoming dimension. In the case of Asian societies that we have presented, yes, you are right. In my own previous research, I also wrote about the future success, right? It's becoming very, very preoccupied by Chinese parents. So you have to invest in the child so that they can be future successful. I think that itself is a question, a kind of social problem we will need to think about. For example, in this year, we've seen a lot of reports in China of children's psychological issues. So children becoming more and more depressed. And that's, for me, because the being of the children are not well taken care of. Instead, they are hugely they are the really objectified as the future investment property. So yes, the hope for futures and future success is an important aspect in many Asian societies when we are talking about child rearing. But I think it's now time, at this moment, really a time for us to reflect on whether we need to reconsider and bring back the idea of children's being into the picture. And when we talk about fertility, and we talk about, overpressure in education, and we talk about children's psychological issues and all that. Yeah, that's only what I can think of now. Hopefully
Thank you.
answers.
I really agree with both your viewpoints. I think we tend to neglect the being of children, and we are always striving towards them becoming somebody successful. So, I really like the distinction between being and becoming. I really like it very much. Don't really see the issue about being as becoming as being, and so on. But I think analytically, it is useful to make the distinction between being and becoming. And I personally like it very much. Anybody from the
Thank you.
audience would like to ask a question? Hushu?
Thank you, Xiaorong and Doris, for this very exciting sharing. I think the book is. I will definitely go and check, read more about the book. Yeah, so thank you for that. My question is kind of, I think, related to the discussion so far, and I wanna hear more about your thoughts on the two key terms in the title of the book. One is bridge, the other is burden barrier. So burden barrier, I think, because the discussion just now is about future success and investing heavily in children. And when you talked about burden barrier, you also talked about children shouldering, the hopes of family, and for family survival and for family future success or prosperity. So there seems to be quite closely linked, these two discussions here. And so the burden barrier narrative resonates a lot with my own observation and research on children and family in the context of China. And Xiaorong just mentioned about the recent surge of media reports on children's psychological well-being, stresses, depression, and so on. So this is really a huge issue, I think. And it's not just in China, it's quite prevalent, I think, in East Asia, where there's this very intense education competition. So in a way, parents, even though the attention, the resources of the entire family are really concentrated on children, but it always has this orientation towards future success, towards their educational achievement. So this is not a question, but maybe just a comment. The second part on children being bridge. So in your sharing, when you talk about the young generation as bridge, you mainly talked about cases where it's cross-cultural families, like immigrants, second, third generation of immigrant families in European context. I'm just wondering, I think another way of looking at the young generation as bridge is the time dimension, given that how fast technology is advancing. So it feels, in discussions about aging, how to cope with aging, one way policymakers or the communities at large talk about is to tap on young generations' help. So they help the older parents or grandparents to cope with the very fast changing technology scene. So in a way, I think that this is probably another angle of looking at the young generation as bridge. So yeah, these are just some thoughts after hearing you. So just like you to share on this. Thank you.
Do you want to respond, Xiaorong or Doris?
Doris, you want to go first, or I can go first, or?
You go ahead,
Okay.
because it was so much about China.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll go first, and Doris, you can add to my comments, my response. And thank you very much, Hu Shu. Yeah, I mean, you are an expert on China, of course, and you yourself been written about the burden bearer aspect of it. Indeed, I think we had a prior discussion with Vincent before the seminar. We talked about this aspect of burden bearer as an important aspect that distinguishes childhood in the global South and in the global North, because the kind of burden bearer situation is due to a lot of social inequality and a lot of the lack of public support in societies without welfare state, and that in a way is a kind of public issue translated into a personal issue. That's what I, in my own work, have tried to emphasize. So in the case of migrant children in migrant families, for example, I use the term of doing class, children doing class. They try, so the whole message from society, from the parents and for themselves to them is, I have to work hard so that my family can, move forward. This is, a kind of situation where nobody talked about. Also, so the kind of public responsibility, the responsibility of public support is totally out of the picture. So it's, the burden bearer aspect of it, for me, it's really the lack of public support. So that those in the disadvantaged conditions only everybody in the family try to bear the burden so that they can survive or even, move forward. Yeah, that's the first part. I don't know whether I answered your question or not. And the second part about bridge, yeah, I think it's very, very, very wonderful suggestion. Certainly, I think the generational gaps in terms of technology use, in terms of, social changes, is really, really there. And children's and the younger generation, the more the people who ride on the trend, okay, actually can bridge the gap between the parents or the older generations with the modern, social life and changes. Yeah, that's a very wonderful aspect.
Doris?
Yeah.
I would like to add something to public support and burden bearer. I think the burden bearer also becomes, for instance, a resource in the situation of migration. We have in Germany the young Vietnamese, the Vietnamese Germans, who are at the mostly successful. Most of them are from simple families, and in this inequality which we have in education, which means that they all have the same chances in some way, but they don't have the same chances in the effect. They surprise the German educational researchers because they are much more successful than they should be. And they are very high achievers, and most of them go to academic tracks, and they come from rather lower class families, what considers the status of the parents, and they should then not be that successful in our expectations, and it's their obligation to be burden bearers who is a resource, who gives a sort of ambition, which in our expectation, our Western expectation, should not be given because they are from lower class families, and our children in our model of becoming successful would then not be enough supported from their parents. They would not have enough investment of capital, social and cultural capital. And this is what makes the study of Asian childhood for us so interesting as well, because there's a lot of migration, there's a lot of hybrid forms, and this forces us to think anew about what may be the impact of class, that there may be a positive impact of lower class. Given that the welfare state pays their education, that is for us completely unexpected, and makes us see a social mechanism in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually the effect of human agency, right? In this example, the Viet gems, they actually becoming more agentic and becoming more successful in that way. Yeah.
Thank you for the responses. I see that the clock is 5:02, so I think we should call it a day. So thank you very much to the speakers, but also to the audience for turning up for this seminar. I just have a very quick question, and that is whether you would consider adding Singapore to the cases.
Oh yeah, we actually tried to find contributions from Singapore, but wasn't successful. One way
I
or
think
another.
Singapore would make a very interesting case. Yeah.
Yeah. Certainly, I think Singapore is a case worthy of study. We'll try to.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So really appreciate you sharing your research with us, and let's keep in touch. So thank you everybody, and wish everyone a very wonderful weekend ahead.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Yeah, see you.